Imagine for a moment that within each of us lies a powerful, yet often ignored part, our shadow. It's a mysterious repository where the answers to the deepest emotional riddles that torment us are hidden. In this secret dimension reside not only painful traumas that hinder our progress, but also the keys to freeing ourselves from their power. Almost a century ago, Carl Jung, one of the most prominent psychologists in history, lifted the veil on this concept, but only a few have fully grasped its transformative potential. What if we assume that it is the shadow, the part of ourselves that we so desperately try to avoid, that holds the key to healing? Jung argued, what we resist only becomes more entrenched in us. Today we will embark on a journey to explore how the conscious activation of the shadow can transform a person into a fortress, impenetrable to the pain of the past. Most people prefer to live by avoiding a close look inside themselves. They seek salvation in distractions, build excuses, blame others, just to avoid facing their shadow face to face. But today we will try to break down this barrier. If you are here, it means that something inside you is ready for this difficult but necessary journey. The first step towards activating the shadow is to learn to recognize and control your impulsive reactions. Jung called this conscious individuation, the process of separating the true self from automatic unconscious reactions that often determine our behavior. When a person acts impulsively, not giving himself time to reflect on the situation, his actions are often dictated by the shadow aspects of his personality, hidden in the depths of the subconscious. Instead of consciously working on himself, the individual allows these shadow forces to control his behavior. Carl Jung, the eminent Swiss psychologist and psychiatrist, argued that uncontrolled emotional outbursts are a direct reflection of internal conflicts and unresolved problems. This means that a disproportionately strong reaction to certain events or words indicates not the power of external stimuli, but a touched, emotional wound. Indeed, why are some people able to remain calm in situations that throw others into a state of emotional turmoil? The answer lies in the differences in the degree of awareness and acceptance of their shadow sides. By succumbing to an impulsive reaction to a random comment, a fleeting glance, or any deviation from the expected scenario, a person loses control of himself and becomes predictable, vulnerable, and susceptible to manipulation. As long as an individual remains reactive, he will remain in the power of his unhealed traumas. In this regard, a logical question arises: why do some situations cause such an acute reaction? Jung explained this by the fact that a person worries too much about things that are not of primary importance. Excessive dependence on the opinions of others, the need for external recognition and approval. These are patterns of behavior that formed in childhood, when the approval of significant adults was necessary for survival. However, in adulthood, these patterns lose their relevance and become more of an obstacle to emotional maturity. People who have achieved genuine emotional stability have learned an important lesson. Not everything deserves a reaction, especially something as valuable as personal energy. Every time a person rushes to defend himself, tries to justify himself, or responds with anger and disappointment, he inadvertently demonstrates his vulnerabilities to others, pointing to the points where a blow can be struck. Imagine this: insults are flying at you, and you remain calm, as if watching a passing cloud. Someone is desperately trying to unbalance you, but not a single muscle twitches on your face. Chaos rages around, and you remain an oasis of calm. At that moment you become an impregnable fortress for the wounds inflicted by the past. Carl Jung called this state the realization of the self, the moment when you cease to be a puppet in the hands of unconscious projections of your own shadow. But how do you develop this ability to remain calm and learn to consciously interact with your shadow? First of all, make it a rule to pause before answering. Jung tirelessly emphasized the importance of this space between stimulus and reaction. Most people, like puppets, react impulsively, not giving themselves time to think. As soon as someone attacks them, they immediately take a defensive position. However, by training your mind to make this saving pause, you create a sacred space where you can observe the manifestations of your shadow in action. It is in this space that the question arises, does what is happening really deserve my energy and attention? Jung would argue that this is the practice of consciously confronting the unconscious. And you'll be amazed to find that in the vast majority of cases the answer will be no. Secondly, it's essential to cultivate the skill of detached observation, as Carl Jung tirelessly emphasized. The essence of this principle lies in the ability to be aware of one's own emotions without being completely consumed by them. Not every event occurring in the surrounding reality requires immediate emotional involvement. Often, the wisest response is no response at all. One should practice perceiving life situations as if a spectator watching a movie where they themselves play the main role, without judgment, but with impartial attention. Thirdly, it's important to develop what Jung called selective indifference. This isn't a call to become an insensitive and cold person. It's about consciously choosing the aspects to which one gives particular importance. It's impossible to shield oneself from others' attempts to provoke a negative reaction, but it's entirely possible to avoid getting involved in their manipulative games. This is an effective way to regain control over one's own shadow side of the personality. Fourthly, it's necessary to master the art of managing body language. Jung deeply understood that the body is a mirror reflection of the unconscious. Silence, composure, and a neutral facial expression represent a powerful arsenal in confronting attempts at destabilization from others. In a situation where someone tries to throw a person off balance and they remain calm, staying still and showing no obvious signs of emotional reaction, there comes the realization that the manipulator no longer has power over the inner shadows of the personality. And fifthly, one should replace impulsive reactions with strategic planning. Carl Jung, the eminent Swiss psychiatrist, put forward the concept of the transcendent function, emphasizing the ability of a person to transform the destructive energy of emotions into a creative force. Instead of succumbing to impulsive emotional reactions, he urged consciously choosing a strategic approach. In some situations, as Jung noted, silence can be the most convincing answer, while a simple smile can disarm any aggression. It's important not to give in to fleeting impulses, but to think in terms of the long-term perspective. What happens when a person stops blindly reacting and begins to consciously work with their shadow side of the personality? Jung argued that at this moment a process of deep transformation is launched. Those around begin to perceive such a person differently. Some experience confusion, not understanding why they no longer react in the usual way. Others feel disappointment, realizing that they can no longer manipulate them. However, there are also those who begin to experience even greater respect, as the energy of a person who has integrated their shadow is felt and has an impact. But, as Jung emphasized, the most important thing is the inner state of the person, their self-perception. They realize that they are no longer a puppet in the hands of unconscious emotions. Invulnerability to trauma, according to Jung, is not indifference, but the result of deep self-knowledge and awareness of one's shadow side, which allows one to maintain inner balance despite external influences. To strengthen emotional control, Jung recommended the following exercise. For a week, every time an impulsive reaction arises, it's necessary to pause for 5 seconds before responding. One should pay attention to the body's reaction, tension, discomfort, anxiety. All these are signs of the activation of the shadow side of the personality and a signal for deeper self-analysis. Jung advised making a list of situations that cause the strongest reactions and analyzing their causes, identifying old emotional wounds that they touch upon. This process, called Working with the Complex by Jung, is aimed at identifying emotional knots formed in the past and continuing to influence the present. Every evening, it's necessary to ask oneself, how many times during the day did external factors manage to throw you off balance? It's important to visualize an image of oneself, free from these traps, a person who has integrated their shadow and transformed their darkness into strength. Another way to activate the shadow for healing traumas is to master the art of letting go. Jung considered attachment to be the greatest weakness of a person. Everything that holds back, everything that is difficult to let go of, makes a person vulnerable to past traumas. People who have achieved genuine invulnerability have mastered what Jung called the release of blocked psychic energy. The problem, however, is that most people don't know how to let go. They cling to people, situations, expectations, believing that by letting them go, they will lose something important. We were taught that letting go means losing, and leaving means giving up. But Jung argued the opposite. When a person learns to let go, they gain freedom. Jung constantly emphasized the importance of non-attachment as a fundamental process of individuation, a path to psychic integrity. He understood that people who cannot let go live trapped in their past, their pain, and what they cannot control. The power lies in the fact that when a person ceases to fear loss, when they release the unconscious bonds that tie them to past wounds, they become immune to new traumas. It is worth asking yourself, how many times have you had to stay in a place where you no longer belong? How many times have you had to maintain relationships that drained you only out of fear of letting go? How many times have you had to try to change another person, hoping that one day they will become who you want them to be? According to Jung, a person tends to project the unrecognized aspects of their shadow personality onto surrounding situations and people. It is important to realize that you should not hold on to what requires constant effort and persuasion. The true always comes naturally, without coercion. Anything that disrupts inner peace comes at too high a cost. People who have realized their shadow side know how to let go quickly. They do not linger where they are not appreciated and do not insist where there is no respect. They are not afraid of losses, knowing that what is meant for them will come effortlessly. Jung asserted that as long as the unconscious controls life, a person will consider it fate. To break free from recurring traumatic patterns, it is necessary to let go of what no longer serves. How to let go without feeling loss? Jung suggests changing your attitude towards non-attachment. He said that denial enslaves but acceptance transforms. Letting go is not losing but accepting. Accepting that some people come only to teach, not to stay forever. Accepting that some opportunities are not meant for us. Accepting the need to complete cycles for further movement. The main reason people don't let go is fear. Fear of loneliness, fear of making mistakes, fear of regret. However, Jung discovered that when faced with fear, when looking into one's shadow, it turns out not to be so huge. The monster in the dark diminishes when the light of consciousness is turned on. As an exercise in liberation, based on Jungian techniques, it is suggested to think about what is difficult to let go of today: a relationship, a thought, a situation. Then ask yourself, what will happen if you just stop carrying it? Imagine the feeling of lightness, peace, and tranquility. This feeling of freedom confirms the correctness of the decision to let go. Jung recommended cultivating affirmations that rebuild relationships with the shadow. For example, you can repeat, "I believe that what is meant for me will come effortlessly." The true does not require desperate retention. A powerful method used by Jung consisted of destroying the pattern of emotional attachment. The next time the desire arises to insist where there is no appreciation, you should do the opposite. Leave. Observe what happens when a person stops chasing what wants to leave. Jung called this a reality check, an experiment showing the true state of affairs. It often turns out that by letting go, the universe surprises with something better. According to the outstanding psychologist Carl Jung, there is an unmistakable way to determine whether it is time to free yourself from something that holds a person in the past. This method consists of the following thought experiment. It is necessary to imagine that the object of attachment has disappeared from life. Then you should carefully analyze your feelings caused by this thought. If anxiety is replaced by a feeling of calm and peace, then the answer becomes obvious. Jung concluded that often the root of the problem lies not in the attachment itself, but in the stubborn unwillingness to recognize the inevitable. It is pointless to cling to what is not destined to remain, and this resistance only exacerbates emotional wounds. Mastering the art of letting go opens the way to what Jung called psychic alchemy, a deep transformation of a person's energy. Instead of living in a constant feeling of lack, they attain a state of abundance. others begin to perceive them differently, because the self-confidence inherent in a person who is not afraid of losses has a special attraction. Such a person gains more control over their life because they stop wasting energy on holding on to what is not beneficial to them. Jung emphasized that the ability to let go is the highest manifestation of self-confidence. The one who is unable to part with the past becomes a prisoner of fear, and fear, as is known, is a breeding ground for unhealed traumas. The third path to awakening the shadow and healing emotional wounds lies through understanding the power of silence and mystery. Inaccessibility, as an art, is available to few, but those who possess it gain a tremendous advantage in working with the shadow side of the personality. In an era of universal striving for publicity, the ability to remain silent and restrained becomes a powerful tool. Carl Jung, a prominent psychologist, emphasized the importance of silent introspection. He argued that people who have reached the depths of integrating their shadow are distinguished by their ability to control their words and actions. They do not need to constantly declare their thoughts and intentions, preferring to act, observe, and let the results speak for themselves. However, most people do not have sufficient control over their words and energy, often excessively explaining and justifying themselves. Jung saw this as a manifestation of inner insecurity and an unintegrated shadow. Every ill-considered word becomes potential information that can be used against the speaker, or, even worse, energy wasted instead of being directed towards internal transformation. The psychology of silence has a profound impact on the process of healing trauma, allowing one to focus on the inner world and gain control over their shadow. Carl Jung, a prominent researcher of the human psyche, concluded that excessive openness and predictability deprive a person of the opportunity to establish a deep connection with their own inner world. When a personality becomes too accessible and talkative, its value in the eyes of others decreases, as it creates the illusion of complete knowledge about it. The absence of mystery and depth does not stimulate interest and the desire to learn more. This principle applies to all aspects of life. In interpersonal relationships, constant availability and frankness lead to a person being perceived as something taken for granted, a safe but unintriguing option. In the professional sphere, excessive disclosure of plans and strategies can lead to competitors using the information to their advantage. In everyday life, the constant desire to explain and justify one's decisions creates in others a sense of entitlement to interfere and evaluate someone else's life. Jung revealed that limiting information about oneself gives a person more control over the process of individuation and integration of their shadow side. Silence becomes a protective mechanism, as not everyone deserves access to the inner world and knowledge of thoughts and feelings. Shifting to a strategy of less talk, more observation, allows one to notice hidden motives and patterns underlying human interactions, what Jung called the game of masks. The unpredictability arising from silence gives an advantage in the process of self-discovery and healing. Those around begin to treat with greater respect someone who does not feel the need to constantly explain themselves, who exudes natural authority. Confidence born from the courage to face their inner demons. Furthermore, the ability to listen allows one to recognize other people's projections and hidden intentions that others may unconsciously place on the personality. Jung suggested a number of techniques to use the power of mystery in the process of conscious work with the shadow. Firstly, one should not share their plans until they are implemented. Premature announcement of intentions can lead to dissipation of the energy needed for internal changes. It is better to act than to talk. Secondly, one should not justify their decisions, especially those related to the personal path of healing. It is necessary to remain true to one's choices, allowing the results to speak for themselves. Thirdly, it is important to control body language. Jung emphasized that mystery lies not only in words, but also in the manner of behavior. A neutral facial expression, a confident gaze, and deliberate pauses can be more effective than thousands of words. This is a manifestation of the presence of an integrated self. Fourthly, one must learn to enjoy silence. Jung spent a lot of time alone, exploring his unconscious. He found that people who have achieved deep healing feel comfortable in silence because they do not need to prove anything to themselves or others. Fifthly, one should make people want to ask questions. One should not reveal all the cards at once. It is necessary to leave room for curiosity. Genuine interest arises where there is something to discover. Sixthly, it is important to realize the power of the pause. Before answering an uncomfortable question, it is worth taking a pause to think about the answer. Jung called this time for psychic processing. The pause creates the impression that words have weight and value. And finally, seventhly, one should not share their vulnerabilities with just anyone. Jung was very selective about who he shared his research on the unconscious with. It is important to ensure that those who have access to personal vulnerability truly deserve this trust and are able to create a safe space for transformation. Here is an effective method for cultivating what Carl Jung defined as silent presence. For 7 days, it is recommended to adhere to the following principles. Aim for maximum brevity in responses, avoiding unnecessary explanations, and limiting yourself to only the necessary information. Clarity, conciseness, and directness in communication are essential. Observation should take precedence over speech. Carefully analyze the behavior of those around you in situations where not all internal information is disclosed. Actively use pauses in conversations, taking a conscious breath before responding, which will allow you to maintain composure. Do not prematurely announce plans for personal growth until they materialize. Let actions speak for themselves, surprising others instead of making empty promises. Mastering the art of conscious silence, as Jung understood it, opens up profound perspectives. By controlling the flow of information and not revealing all your cards at once, you can drastically change how others perceive you. This may cause discomfort in some because of the inability to understand your true intentions. Others will admire the confidence you display, which is rare. Still others will try to solve the riddle, as the unknown is always more attractive than predictability. This is the Jungian principle. By becoming an enigma, a person draws power to their side. Their shadow ceases to be a source of fear, turning into a powerful ally. One effective way to awaken your shadow to heal emotional wounds is to prioritize your own interests above all else. As Jung noted, a significant portion of humanity tends to relegate themselves to the background, striving to please others, meet their expectations, and earn recognition. This common mistake, according to the psychologist, makes people weak and susceptible to repeated traumas. Jung explained that by putting yourself last, you relinquish control of your psychic life into the hands of others. He tirelessly emphasized the importance of the process he called individuation, that is, becoming a whole and independent personality, reconciled with their shadow. However, as Jung argued, this is impossible to achieve while continuing to sacrifice yourself for those who are not willing to do the same. People who are resistant to emotional shocks have long learned this lesson. When a person puts their own needs and interests first, the balance of power shifts in their favor. Jung viewed this not as selfishness, but as an act of restoring mental dignity. The root of the problem, in his opinion, lies in the fact that society teaches us to feel guilty for thinking about ourselves and our needs. From an early age, the idea of the unacceptability of selfishness, the need for self-sacrifice and generosity, is instilled in a person's mind. Such upbringing, as Jung argued, breeds inferiority complexes, stable mental constructs that make an individual feel unworthy of attention to their own needs. However, Jung drew a clear line between unhealthy selfishness and healthy self-love. If the former implies only demands not supported by giving back, the latter, which he called the realization of selfhood, consists of the ability to share with the world without depleting one's own resources. This is the Jungian key to harmony. When a person begins to prioritize their own interests, the attitude of others changes. They cease to be easy prey, someone who can be used at a convenient moment. They become a person with their own principles, and people, as you know, respect those who have clear standards. Jung discovered a fundamental law of human relationships. Someone who does not value themselves will always be just one of the options, but never a priority. If an individual constantly sacrifices their time, energy, and well-being for others without receiving adequate return, the only result is that others get used to the fact that they deserve less. From a Jungian perspective, this means that constant availability devalues a person, unresponsiveness creates the illusion of the absence of their own life, and disrespect for oneself provokes a similar attitude from others. People with immunity to recurring traumas have learned what Jung called the art of healthy boundaries, and it's not about coldness or detachment, but about realizing the value of one's own mental energy and unwillingness to waste it on just anyone. How do you start valuing your own interests and needs without experiencing a crushing sense of guilt? The great psychologist Carl Jung offers a number of effective techniques that can transform everyone's life. First of all, you need to learn to say a firm no without bothering yourself with unnecessary explanations. Jung emphasized that there is no need to justify the unwillingness to do something. A simple no thank you is perfectly sufficient. Any unnecessary explanation only provokes attempts to challenge the decision. Secondly, the practice of one-sided giving should be stopped. Jung pointed out that many people fall into the nets of so-called parasitic relationships. If a person notices that they are constantly making concessions, making efforts, and doing all the work, it is worth stopping and carefully looking at who remains nearby in difficult times. Thirdly, it is necessary to block access to your life for those who do not show proper appreciation. Jung was adamant on this issue. Not everyone deserves a place in your inner world. If someone appears only when they need something, this is a sure sign of vampiric relationships. Without the slightest remorse, such people should be excluded from your circle. Fourthly, it is important to devote time to yourself before caring for others. Jung daily found time for self-analysis, meditation, and work with dreams. You cannot put someone else's interests above your own mental balance. If something drains more than it brings satisfaction, then from the point of view of Jungian psychology, it is not worth the effort. And finally, fifthly, you should get rid of the feeling of guilt for putting yourself first. Jung argued that this feeling is often imposed from the outside and is not a real sign of committing a bad deed. A person owes no one their time and energy. If someone is upset because you are paying attention to yourself, then most likely this person is simply used to benefiting from your self-sacrifice. It is proposed to conduct a kind of experiment which Jung called prioritization, and evaluate its immediate results. If there are still doubts about how much prioritization can change life, it is worth conducting such an experiment for a week. You need to say no to what you really do not want to do without feeling guilty. It is necessary to observe the reaction of others when you stop being always available. You should devote time only to yourself, isolating yourself from external stimuli. It is important to reflect on how many times during the day a person acts out of a sense of duty and not out of a sincere desire. Jung called this the recognition of unconscious obsessive actions. The result will not be long in coming. Those who truly appreciate will respect personal space and established boundaries. Those who only needed a person for convenience will leave. And this is exactly what is needed in the process of healing and recovery. When a person puts their own interests first, a metamorphosis occurs, which Carl Jung defined as the transformation of the self. Those around them begin to treat them differently. Those who sincerely appreciate them remain nearby and begin to respect them even more. Those who pursued only their own benefits disappear from their lives. People who are used to taking them for granted suddenly realize the prospect of loss. This is the Jungian principle. When an individual realizes their own value and puts the integration of their shadow side above the desire to please others, the world responds in kind. Jung called this the law of psychic reciprocity. However, there is an even higher stage of development, a complete transformation of presence. It is not just about prioritizing, but about radiating a special energy that makes the world perceive a person in a completely new way. When an individual becomes invulnerable to trauma, their energy field undergoes radical changes. They cease to be someone who begs, pursues, or allows themselves to be manipulated, imposing someone else's desires. Now, this is a personality who realizes their own value and is not afraid to lose what does not suit them. Jung argued that people who have reached this level acquire what he called the presence of an integrated self. This is something that is not expressed in words, but is perceived at the level of sensations. When such a person enters a room, others cannot help but notice the change. They no longer need confirmation of their importance or approval from others. As a result, they begin to attract more respect, admiration, and opportunities. Jung explained this as follows: people have respect for someone who is not afraid to lose anything. He constantly emphasized the importance of individuation, the process of becoming a whole personality with an integrated shadow, independent of external evaluation. When a person reaches this level, the perception of them by others changes dramatically. Think for a moment about the phenomenon of a personality who, needing no one's support, nevertheless attracts others like a magnet. Carl Jung, an outstanding Swiss psychologist and philosopher, offered an explanation for this phenomenon, seeing the root of attractiveness in mental independence. A self-sufficient and whole person, having gone through the thorns of self-knowledge and reconciled with their shadow side, ceases to be an object of manipulation and neglect. Those who previously didn't notice them suddenly begin to seek their company. Doors of opportunity open before them without requiring persistent knocking. Jung discovered that the presence of such a person becomes palpable without unnecessary words or gestures. People tempered by emotional storms and not seeking external approval don't need proof of their worth. They don't strive to impress or attract attention, but paradoxically find themselves at the center of it. The reason lies in the magnetism of self-confidence and the integration of the shadow aspects of personality. Jung contrasted two types of behavior: the pursuit of approval, expressed in excessive talkativeness, a desire to please, and a striving to appear flawless, and genuine presence, characterized by firm energy and a lack of need for self-affirmation. He called the former living from the persona, the social mask, and the latter living from the self, the authentic core of a human being. The key point emphasized by Jung is that reaching this level of self leads to a change in the attitude of others. Such a person begins to be treated as a valuable interlocutor, whose opinion is important and whose presence is significant. Climbing to a certain height is a serious achievement, but staying at that level is a task of a different order. Carl Jung, an outstanding psychologist, left behind 3 principles to help a person become invulnerable to others' manipulations. First of all, it is necessary to put inner peace above everything else. Jung insisted on this rule. If someone makes you doubt your own worth, then that person doesn't fit into the process of self-development and doesn't deserve a place in your life. Secondly, you shouldn't waste time on explanations and justifications when it comes to your own well-being. Jung noted that excessive explanations are often an attempt to gain approval from the outside. It's important to confidently follow the chosen path of self-improvement and not need anyone's confirmation of the correctness of your actions. Thirdly, it's necessary to surround yourself with people who also strive for conscious work with their shadow. Jung always emphasized the importance of the environment. If there are people around who are insecure and dependent on the opinions of others, then sooner or later they can draw you into the old vicious circle. Jung made an interesting observation. When a person becomes unattainable for recurring traumas, the social dynamics change dramatically. Unattainability means not only a change in perception by others, but also a complete transformation of the life scenario. People who used to ignore you begin to seek communication, and those who tried to manipulate you feel uncomfortable in the presence of a strong personality. Opportunities arise on their own, without the need to look for them, because people feel the energy of a person who knows their worth, who has looked into their shadow and accepted it. Carl Jung, an outstanding Swiss psychologist, offered an effective method for maintaining a state of expanded consciousness. For 7 days, you should carefully monitor who is trying to take possession of your attention and ask yourself whether these people are really worthy of penetrating your inner world. Whenever there is an impulse to explain your actions or justify yourself, you need to stop and be silent, practicing so-called mental restraint. Any manifestations of behavior that betray a desperate desire to be accepted should be eradicated. Jung called this liberation from the persona, that is, from the social mask that we wear. Every night before going to bed, it's helpful to ask yourself, was I guided today by inner confidence or by the need for external confirmation? The result of achieving such a level of shadow integration, as Jung predicted, is a change in the world's attitude toward you. Those around you begin to feel admiration, although they can't always explain the reason. People begin to treat you with greater respect, even if you don't do anything extraordinary. There's a feeling of freedom, previously unknown, because the need for anything from other people disappears. This is a fundamental difference that Jung noted. When a person ceases to need approval, attention, or confirmation of their worth, they automatically become someone others strive for. However, to reach this state, it's necessary to leave behind everything that once made you dependent on the external world. You need to accept your shadow, not run away from it. This is what distinguishes those who remain in captivity of others' expectations and recurring traumas from those who truly become invulnerable to emotional pain. Becoming an unattainable person through conscious acceptance of your shadow side is not a manifestation of arrogance, as it may seem at first glance. According to Jung, this is a demonstration of inner strength and the realization that no one has the right to bully, manipulate, or make a person feel inferior. It is taking control of one's own psyche and establishing impregnable boundaries. People who have reached this stage no longer obey the rules of others, do not seek approval, and do not ask permission to be themselves, and, as a result, the world begins to treat them differently. After all, when a person stops imposing themselves, they become a magnet. When they do not beg, they become a valuable prize. When they do not make excuses, they become a mystery. And a mystery, as Jung noted, always attracts attention. Adopting this mindset based on the conscious integration of the shadow leads to what Jung called alchemical transformation. The very presence of a person changes. They cease to be someone who can be ignored or taken for granted. Relationships that did not bring benefits fade into the past, giving way to those who genuinely value their energy. Opportunities arise on their own, as inner confidence has a magnetism that people feel instinctively. And, most importantly, peace of mind is gained, as there is no longer any need to waste energy trying to meet someone else's expectations or please everyone. Jung considered this inner peace a sure sign of successful shadow integration. However, this does not happen instantly. Jung emphasized that it is continuous, daily work. It is a decision that must be made every day, every time there is an impulsive desire to react, when there is a need to justify oneself, when doubts arise about one's own worth. In such moments, it is important to remember Jung's words. The point is not to become good by suppressing the evil within oneself, but to find a greater good that will make the former evil insignificant. Inspired by the teachings of Carl Jung, everyone should make a conscious decision, declaring to themselves a firm intention. I choose to be unassailable to everything that does not serve my good. My psychic energy is a valuable resource, and I intend to protect it. Jung emphasized the power of conscious affirmations, seeing them as a way of communicating with the unconscious. One should demonstrate to the world through actions, not words, that there is no longer any need for external approval or attention. A person who respects themselves, puts their own priorities first, has known their shadow side, and has learned to live with it in harmony, deserves a different attitude. Becoming unreachable in the Jungian sense is not an escape from the world, but an approach to one's true essence, to one's authentic nature. This is the greatest act of self-love that a person is capable of. Jung once remarked, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." It is time to awaken and consciously activate one's shadow, turning it into a powerful ally in the process of healing from traumas that hold one in the past. True transformation comes when a person stops avoiding their darkness and learns to interact with it. One recalls the words of Jung, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." And today everyone can make a choice to become unreachable for the traumas of the past, opening the way to a new, integrated personality.